Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Carla Alegria, Project Manager with the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. Today's webinar, Family-Centered Toolkit for Domestic Violence Programs, an Overview, Part 1, What's in it, and Guidance for Program Managers, will be presented by Susan Blumenfeld and Jeannette Baca. Before we get started, I would like to go over some of the technical details of the WebEx software that we'll be using for today's webinar. Please be aware that your screen might look a little different depending on whether you're using a Mac or PC. On the right-hand side of the screen, there should be multiple boxes. If not, towards the bottom, there's a chat feature. You may have to click on the chat cloud icon at the bottom right of your screen to open your chat box. This feature will allow you to provide feedback and share resources with your fellow colleagues, as well as get in contact with the presenter if you have questions regarding the training content. You may contact me if you have any questions troubleshooting the WebEx software. To do this, click the down-facing arrow and select the person you would like to contact. You'll see a lot of options, but for this session, you'll want to select everyone if you would like to respond to a question from the presenter or to contact the center staff anytime during the session. You should click on me, Carla, to privately contact us if there's a need for troubleshooting this WebEx software. So let's test this chat feature. Will everyone please go to their chat box, click on everyone, type in where you're calling from, and then press enter. I see a few folks are doing it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent. Glad it's working. While you can get a lot out of this feature, there are times when it moves really quickly and can feel distracting. So if that's true for you, feel free to minimize the chat box by clicking the arrow next to where it says chat. You can always open it again with that same arrow if you choose. Time permitting, we will moderate Q&A via the chat box. And at the very end of the webinar, we'll post a brief survey via SurveyMonkey in the chat. Please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better. If you get disconnected at any point, return to the email you received with the original webinar link and re-enter the training. Sometimes the sound cuts out due to internet connection, so feel free to call back in if that's a problem for you. If you're experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to contact me, you may call WebEx tech support to resolve any issue. That phone number, which I'll post in the chat box, is 1-866-229-3239. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Susan.
Welcome, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. We're so glad that you're joining us today, and we're very excited to be launching our Family-Centered Toolkit for Domestic Violence Programs. So let me tell you just a little bit. So this is the first of 3 that will introduce you to our toolkit. And today we're just going to give you a general overview, talk a little bit about what's in it, and specific guidance for program managers and supervisors. Then we're doing this 3 Wednesdays in a row, same time, same place. So next Wednesday, we're going to look a little more at the content that is around programming and best practices around responding to the needs of children, teens, and their caregivers. Plus, we're going to demonstrate one of the learning vignettes, which is designed to enhance practice with families. And then our 3rd webinar in this series will be on November 3rd. And in that one, we're going to explore the sections that are related to engaging and supporting caregivers and their families. We'll also talk about using developmentally sensitive activities to strengthen parent-child, caregiver-child relationships and to promote well-being and resilience. And we're very excited about the fact that we're also in that third webinar going to have a panel of domestic violence program staff and supervisors who were part of our implementation sites in developing this toolkit. So that tells you a little bit about what we'll be doing the next few weeks. Carla, if you can advance the slide, please. So since we can't see you all, although I do recognize at least a name or two, we thought we'd show you our pictures. I'm Susan Blumenfeld, and I'm the Director of Training and TA on Children, Families, and Domestic Violence at the National Center. And I provide training and consultation nationally to support organizations serving families and children affected by interpersonal violence and trauma. I've also had the privilege of leading a local capacity building project in the Chicago area, serving the DV community for the past 18 years. And prior to that, I've had a lot of years of experience in clinical social work practice, program development and leadership in child and family mental health. And Jeannette and I met and began a wonderful collaboration when she joined the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I think I'm going to ask Jeannette to introduce herself and maybe talk a little bit about our initial collaboration.
Thanks, Susan. Good afternoon. Hope everyone can hear me. As Susan said, I'm Jeannette Baca. And just to let you know, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I teach social work practice and theories at the Facundo Valdez School of Social Work at New Mexico Highlands University. And as Susan said, I met her while I was working with the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I also have many years of experience working with domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, 12 years in particular working at my local shelter. So I'm happy to be part of this toolkit, and it's been a real pleasure working with Susan. And I'll turn it back to you, Susan, and the next slide.
Next slide, please, Carla. So this just tells you a little bit about our center. We're a special issue resource center, and we're federally funded. And this gives you a little overview of the areas that we cover as part of our center. And if you are not familiar with us and our website, please feel free to check us out. We've got lots of archived webinars and materials and all that may be extremely helpful. Okay, Carla, next slide, please. So this just is a graphic that tells you a little bit about our values and how our work is informed. And as you can see, in the middle, we look at choice and relationship and connection, hope and resilience. And then in the outer circle, you'll see the other lenses of our work. Carla, next slide, please. This is our disclaimer. You can go on to the next. Okay. So we like to start everything when we do presentations, at least when I'm involved with presentations, with centering with our breath. So I would just like to invite you to get comfortable wherever you are, and if you're seated, just kind of elongate your spine a little bit. You can either close your eyes or glance downwards or hold an object in your hand that you want to look at, or focus on the beautiful stones in the picture. And what we're going to do is take 3 deep breaths in through our nose and then exhale through our mouth with a, and you can do this obviously at your own pace. It's going to be different for every person. And when you exhale, see if you can hold your exhale a little longer so that it just kind of leads you into the next breath. So when you're ready, we're going to get started. And here we go with breath number 1. Okay, and if your eyes were closed, you can open them, glance back at the screen. And we always think that in everything that we do in our work, it's really important to remember to take time out to breathe. It's such a good antidote to stress. Okay, Carla, the next slide, please. So this shows you the picture. We're very excited of the cover of our toolkit, which you will be having access to at the end of this webinar. So we're launching it today with this first webinar. And I just wanted to also express my appreciation for the generous support that we received from the Irving Harris Foundation that helped us in the development and implementation of this toolkit. So I think, as Carla mentioned in the beginning, the webinar series, like all of our webinars, will be archived. So if for some reason you miss 2 or 3, you'll be able to access it, and we'll go from there. Okay, Carla, if you could go on to the next slide, and then I'm going to turn this back to Jeannette.
All right. So today we'll be providing an overview of the entire toolkit, and we'll be focusing a little bit on sections related to building organizational capacity from part 1. So we'll also be providing an example from the toolkit on introducing critical conversations for team-based discussions. We'll do that towards the end. We'll have a 5-minute little stretch break about halfway through the webinar today. And then Carla will be posting a survey at the end of our session. Next slide, Carla, please. So why this toolkit? We saw a need. Susan and I have a few years of working directly with survivors and their families. Susan has provided extensive capacity building trainings and developed many resources for domestic violence programs across the country. I've been doing direct services and supporting domestic violence programs in New Mexico. So we know that traditionally domestic violence programs have really separated services for adults and then other services for children and youth. But during the past 20 years, we've become more aware of the effects of domestic violence on children and how the primary relationships between protective caregivers and their children are often the greatest resource for healing and fostering resilience. So we wanted to develop this toolkit to really help domestic violence programs better integrate and support a range of trauma and developmentally sensitive, culturally responsive, and family-centered services for adult survivors and their children. Well, we recognize that many of you, all organizations, right, have your own unique aspects and challenges for serving families within your communities. And therefore, being family-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive may look really different across communities. When we say family-centered, culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and developmentally sensitive, we mean a range of practices that really embraces the whole family as they define themselves and supports the relationships between the survivor and their children, fostering their well-being and supporting healing and really honoring and respecting their experiences and their beliefs and their choices. We wanted to create a toolkit with lots of resources, of which we have in here, that was also comprehensive, easily accessible, and included content and step-by-step guidance for working with families. I want to make special mention about the 6 implementation sites in New Mexico and the Chicago area who helped us really shape the content of what's included and the form of this toolkit. We started this toolkit prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has become clear last year that we needed to include other pieces, right? Like aspects of virtual services and virtual activities to engage families. So in part 3 of the webinar series, we will include a panel discussion with advocates and program supervisors who participated in the project. We are very grateful for their input and knowledge that they shared with us. So in New Mexico was Enlace Comunitario, Esperanza Shelter, and Roberta's Place. And in the Chicago area, Apnagar, Constance Morris House, Pillars Community Health, and Sarazin. So a big appreciation to those programs. Next slide.
Okay, I think you're turning it back over to me. So we'd like to hear from you about, let's see, is this the first one? Yes, okay. What benefits do you see from your vantage point of creating a family-centered approach to program services? And you can just enter your responses in the chat box and give this a minute of thought. I'm assuming that folks may be in very different sort of ranges, you know, in terms of if you've already started it or not. So Deanna was saying it supports secure attachment between, you know, I'm adding between caregivers and their children. Absolutely, which is so important because we know that those relationships get strained by the stressors of domestic violence. Yes, thank you, Deanna, for that. Anybody else? That's certainly a key benefit. Be random thoughts. They don't have to be perfectly formed. Any other? Okay, let's see. And I don't know what the first name is, but yes. So ensuring that families receive the help they need in a way that's supported and helpful and designed for the family. Absolutely. Many families, I think this next person says, do not want to separate, but want safety and well-being for all. And so really exploring that sort of cutting edge of where we can go. Yes, and then the last commenter was saying that we're really, in providing family-centered services, we're looking at the impact on children and what they've been through and really being able to focus on that at the same time as we're focusing on the survivors. Yes, absolutely. Yes, and Bianca was saying that it helps to create a safety net and increase protective factors. So we're sort of looking at what's the support network like that families have, and we're really focused on that. And you know, the first person that commented was talking about protective factors, and one of the biggest protective factors is that relationship between the survivor and their children or child. Yes, right. You can work on secure attachments, which is huge in healing from trauma. Absolutely. And it's not something that can be done overnight either, but we plant seeds, right? Yes, and Corey's pointing out that looking at the whole family may be more culturally responsive in some cases. Absolutely. Yes, and in any family that we're working with, we want to look at what's their focus, what are their concerns. Absolutely, beautiful comments. We can take one more. Anybody else have something they want to say? Those were excellent. Thank you so much for participating in this. All right, Carla, can we go on to the next slide then, please? Thank you. So we know that there are also barriers or issues to sustaining a family-centered approach to program services. We hope that this toolkit is going to help you kind of move past some of the barriers and issues, but both Jeannette and I are curious to know, what have you found in trying to develop this approach within your program and sustaining it? What do you see as barriers or issues? We're curious to know. Yes, so scheduling, right? How, you know, especially if it's a large family, I've heard this from a lot of advocates, it can be really difficult. So yes, scheduling and certainly language barriers. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. What else? What have you found that can make it more difficult? What are the issues that you're encountering? Cultural barriers. So Patricia, can you say a little more about that? Maybe we can tease that out a little bit more. I don't want to assume that I know what you're getting at there, but it may be different cultures have different expectations. Absolutely. And we hope that in having put together this toolkit that we're really looking at throughout how can we be culturally responsive, and certainly we're looking at cultural humility and getting to know families better. And so Bessie was saying, when working with families in partnership, you get a better understanding of their circumstances. Absolutely. You're seeing different facets of the family that you don't if things are separated. Turf issues, reluctance. Yes, that's a great one. Reluctance to share family members among several providers of assistance, and sometimes, depending on how large your agency is, between programs too. Yes, thanks. That can be a real issue, and I think that's something that we have tried to speak to in the toolkit. There's a section in there. Okay, let's see what Deanna has to say. Yes. So Deanna's pointing out the barriers that can be difficult around how do you separate out conversations that really should be between survivors and other adults, and how can you protect children from that? Yes, I think that comes up a lot. Yeah, it's an excellent issue. Maybe take one more. Did anybody else have an issue or something you want to share? Okay, if not, we are going to go on to the next slide. Oh, challenges of communal living. Yes. Oh, we got a few. Yes, absolutely. So when you're looking at the whole family, if the abuser is still in the home, how do you proceed with caution so that your family's services are not making things more dangerous for everyone? Absolutely. Yeah, and then I really appreciate this last comment about barriers for DV service providers or lack of knowledge. So we're hoping that this toolkit kind of puts everything in a comprehensive place and gives you lots of links to explore further. Funding can be an issue, absolutely. How do you staff up? Yeah, all great issues. And commitment to non-traditional service modalities. Yes, so doing things that are really going to build resilience and support that may look different. Yes, excellent. Okay, so let's move on then to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Jeannette.
Thanks, Susan. We want to share what's in the toolkit. So the toolkit is organized in 13 topic sections and an appendix with references and handouts. So the different sections include relevant links for further exploring online resources and information just more in depth, as well as references that support the content. When navigating through the toolkit, you will be easily able to click on any section from the table of contents, and it will take you directly to that section. So these first 4 sections of the toolkit may be of particular interest to program managers and supervisors who are interested in building an integrated family-centered services approach. So section 1 is the introduction, and it really offers definitions and core beliefs of a family-centered perspective. It offers some information on how these integrated services benefit the families that we are serving, and also really benefit the staff working at the organization. Section 2 is about readiness and getting started, and provides an overview of how to review current services and implement more family-centered approaches. This section has some direct links to the National Center's resource, Becoming an Accessible, Culturally Responsive, Trauma-Informed Organization, and also some team-based activities for building and sustaining more family-centered services. Section 3 offers an overview of ways to build infrastructure to support staff and maintain a family-centered approach. There's some guidance and activities for supporting our own well-being and resilience within our domestic violence organization, as well as resources and tools for organizations to do a more thorough self-assessment. Section 4 is about creating that welcoming and family-friendly environment. We offer some guidance on the physical environment, the sensory aspects of the environment, and the relational environment. So basically everything from what creates a sense of welcome, safety, and trust. Does the family feel represented and comforted in the physical space? Or are there aspects of the sensory and physical space that are inadvertently re-traumatizing or challenging for the family? So it helps us consider how families are treated by us and what it may feel like to participate in services within our organization. This section also offers some practice considerations for engaging and supporting families in culturally responsive ways, as well as some practice considerations for delivering virtual services, of which many of us have been doing over the last year and a half. There's an extensive list of toys and materials in this section as well. Section 5 offers some guidance on the initial stages of engaging children and families in services. There's some safety planning suggestions and templates and information on how to collaborate with multiple systems that support the families that we serve, with some recommendations regarding those referrals and also confidentiality. And I know someone brought that up in the chat. Section 6 is a section that is heavy in content, but it's important content, and it includes foundational knowledge about the importance of attachment relationships, child development, adverse childhood experiences, and how traumatic stressors and experiences may impact development. We also offer within this section a resiliency-based framework to guide our practice in supporting protective caregivers, survivors, and their children. Next slide, Carla, please. All right, so section 7, another large content section, provides practice guidance for offering direct services and ways to partner with primary caregivers to address children's needs. So we offer suggestions on how to respond to concerns and unique needs of children and teens. Some specific topics within this section include identifying mental health needs of children and teens, addressing aggressive and destructive behaviors in children and teens, dealing with anxiety, depression, and self-harming behaviors, dealing with suicidal ideation and suicidal intent, and also child sexual abuse and problematic sexual behaviors. Section 8 provides additional information for understanding and supporting children and teens who may be dealing with challenges or issues in addition to the presenting domestic violence situation. So some of those topics that we included are alcohol and drug use in teens and children, teen dating violence, neurodiversity issues, grief and loss, gender identity in children and teens identified as LGBTQ+. Sections 9, 10, and 11 offer some guidance for supporting caregivers and parents impacted by domestic violence. There's specific information on supporting survivors with mental health needs and supporting survivors who use substances within these sections. Section 12 provides an array of activities that can be used by advocates and by counselors with caregivers and their children to engage in family-centered activities. And then there's other activities that advocates or counselors can do just with children. Susan will be showing an example later on of these activities. And then section 13 offers information on understanding, planning, and conducting program evaluations, which I know is important in our field. So we want to be able to develop and enhance and support and sustain those family-centered services. So there's direct links for setting up an evaluation plan. There's also examples of measurable outcomes, sample questions, and even tips for managing the data. Section 14 is really the appendix. It has a comprehensive list of references, but also includes all of the handouts. So I'm going to turn things back to Susan and the next slide to talk about how each section is formatted.
Thanks, Jeanette. Oh, great. Okay, it's up. So what you're going to see once you have a chance to look through all of this is that Jeanette just went through our content area, so you can see what we have included, and we really built that over the, in terms of what we included over the years from conversations that we had with advocates and counselors in domestic violence programs and what they felt was missing or they wanted, easy access to. And then to really help folks integrate the knowledge into everyday practice, each of the sections has something called critical conversations, and we will show you an example of that a little later on. And so basically it's really having conversations with your team. And in addition to that, and kind of as a companion to it, we have a section that then says, what can a direct staff person do? So it relates back to each of the content areas and also makes some suggestions for how you can move your practice further. And then we have the parallel one for what can a supervisor do. And then in almost all of the sections, we have a practice vignette to help integrate learning and practice. And Jeanette and I ended up putting these in after we worked with the implementation sites that we both have referenced, because we found that it can be really helpful then. You think you got the information, but if you have a vignette, it really helps you apply it in a way. It's outside of your day-to-day practice, but it should be really relevant. There's some guidance on how to use the vignettes. And then part of the guidance is we have two sections that says things for you to consider after you've read the vignette as a team or however you're going to use it. And then what you can do. So we hope that that's going to be really helpful to you. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Clicking on links to resources in each of the sections. So you're going to see lots of URL links outside of the toolkit to give you more knowledge, to expand things if you're interested in a particular topic. But in addition to being able to click on what section you want to go to through the table of contents, you can also click on it'll say link to handout, and you can click on that and it will take you to the handout that's part of the toolkit. And as Jeannette mentioned, at the very end of the toolkit, you can print out these handouts. Okay, so let's move into the next slide, Carla. So this just gives you a sense, we're showing off a little bit about what the toolkit looks like. So we have an opening if you look at the piece on the right, and then this is just an example. This was from, on the left is from section 6, which was on building knowledge around attachment and development, etc. And we have actually this one particular one, you're seeing page 1 of probably 3 pages on resources and links. And truly, we put this in because we've heard from advocates across the country, and certainly in the Chicago area and New Mexico that we've worked with more intensively, that they would really appreciate having more information on child development, what to expect, what's typical as they're working with families, because sometimes that can be a barrier for advocates to feel confident about taking a family-centered approach. So we we'll be very interested to see what you have to say about all of this once you see it, but we hope this will be useful to you. Okay, Carla, next one. So one of the repeating elements are critical conversations, and this just shows you an example of how it's laid out. We're actually going to revisit this a little later because this was under our readiness and getting started section, which was one of our beginning sections. And we'll dig into this a little more later on. So Carla, if you can go on to the next one, please. And this just shows you again, lays out. So the vignettes are pretty short, which we think is helpful. And then, so this is about June, who is really trying to figure out how to get started. She's really looking at how do we reduce some of the rules that we might have. And so then we give you some, on the next page, we give you some things to consider. We talk about the process of, for any of us, that sort of resistance to doing things differently. Sometimes rules come up because of one particular family, and then we find ourselves getting more and more locked in, and families are not appreciative of that. So this is just one example of vignettes. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And what this is showing you, and I mentioned you can click on the link. So in this particular example, it's a handout in the section on activities. And it's something that you can do with families where they draw a house and they put in what their wishes and goals are for their family. And then depending on, the family that you're working with, if they're interested, you can also have them write down what some of their fears are. And they can put that outside of the house, they can put that inside the house, whatever makes sense for them. So that's just an example. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So I think Jeannette gave you a good overview about what the content is. This is, and we just covered sort of how it's formatted, and now just some ideas about how you might want to use the toolkit. So in that, throughout all the sections, but in section 5, which is the one on how do we do parent-child, caregiver-child, and family services, what we're providing is really kind of an array of materials and information that someone that's new to the DV field or new to doing family-centered services, I think will find very helpful. And so it contains everything from the intake process when we're thinking about children and teens, to safety planning across ages and developmental stages. And we have some templates in the toolkit that you may want to adapt for your program and families you're working with. We talk about issues related to confidentiality and mandated reporting, and establishing those partnerships that can be so key to getting that array of services that might benefit and support a family, depending on what they're identifying and want for themselves. We talk about making referrals, and there's just lots of practical resources in here. So that's the first dot point on this. And then again, over the years, we've heard about, I wish we had something at our fingertips on a particular topic. So for instance, we have a whole section on suicidal intent and risks, or aggressive behavior. And Jeannette kind of talked about what some of the topics are throughout the toolkit, but also with tips on how to partner with caregivers to really support the family as you're dealing with something that may be quite distressing for the child, for the teen, for the caregiver. And also what to do when, as an advocate or counselor, you may be holding a concern that the caregiver doesn't see. And how do we work with that? And certainly how do we continue to center the expertise and knowledge and experience of the parent or caregiver. So guidance for building family. Yeah, I think you're going to see that in sections throughout. Section 4, which is creating a welcoming, family-friendly environment, gives some real specifics about what you can do or what you can think about. And it's really a multi-layered approach throughout. So we're looking at it through the lens of an individual advocate, a mental health counselor that's working within a DV program or organization, for volunteers, for supervisors, and for program managers and administrators. So we're kind of looking through, at a number of roles within the organization. And then really throughout, I mean, the vignettes and the critical conversations are a part of this, but we're really looking at staff development. So you can also apply part of what's in here and the framework that we're giving you for mini consultations, either in your individual supervision or team-based supervision, so that you're going to get some perspective outside of yourself, which is so helpful for all of us. Also, you may want to use this as a team to do more monthly intensive dives into some of the sections that we talked about that are more related to knowledge and skills related to working with children and teens and their caregivers. And as new families arrive, you can think about, as an advocate or supervisor or counselor, you can look, I'm not there yet, Carla. Oops. Thank you. You can look at activities that and ideas. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Okay, and then I want to just say a word before we go to the activities about new staff orientation. I think anytime, and a lot of you have been doing virtual onboarding of new staff. So, you can take this toolkit and customize it for the person, based on what their prior experience has been and what they're bringing to this new position. And so you can look with a new staff person at what are they seeing as gaps in their knowledge or practice and areas of growth. Programs may also want to develop a uniform approach to incorporating the toolkit into every new staff orientation. So, and I think in that way, you can move the culture of your organization towards a more integrated approach that we talked about. You can also choose to use sections of the toolkit in individual supervision. So thinking about, what questions get prompted for the staff person? Where might they need more support? What would be helpful? Is anything missing in the toolkit? We certainly want to know about that as well. Because again, we tried to make this comprehensive, but not everything is included. So again, we would encourage you to, once you get your hands on the toolkit, to think about how you might use this with staff. Okay, and then next we're going to go on to activities. Yes, thank you, Carla. So this was something that we kept hearing about over and over again. For volunteers, for advocates, I want something that will help me foster the relationship and bonds between caregivers and their children. So as Jeannette mentioned in the overview, this section 12 has two large sections in it. One of them are activities that advocates can give to caregivers and their children to do together, to strengthen that attachment relationship and their bonds and to have fun together. And then we have a section that you can use individually or with sibling or peer groups. And each of these two larger sections is divided by age and developmental stage. And so we give you a little background on that. What are the key kinds of things to think about when you're looking at relationships between children and their parents, or teens and their parents or caregivers? And so we've divided it broadly into age and developmental stages. And of course, some children may developmentally not be at their chronological age. So it's kind of really using this flexibly to meet the families and the children that you're working with. And then within each of these sections that are divided by age and developmental stage, we have 3 different categories. So we have co-regulating and soothing activities, which we know are so big when people have experienced domestic violence, both children and the survivor. So we talk a little bit about that as well. Because sometimes it's very difficult for survivors to feel regulated enough themselves to be able to co-regulate, soothe their kids. So we look at that. And then more active ways of moving and playing together. And then the last category is creative and expressive arts. Okay, so I think if there aren't any comments, we're going to go on to, I believe are we at our break point? Yes, we are. We're at our 5-minute stretch break. So if you can move on to the next slide, Carla. Great. So we will see you promptly back here in 5 minutes. So enjoy your break.
All right. I hope everyone enjoyed that 5-minute stretch break. So let's get back into talking about the toolkit. Hoping folks are back on. Just watching the time a little bit. Carla, are we good to move to the next slide? Awesome. Thank you so much. So changing the ways organizations support families experiencing domestic violence takes a willingness to undergo self-assessment, constructive critique, and leadership to modify all those existing services and also add some new components. Susan and I felt it was really important to provide that support for self-assessment and for any change in growth that organizations wanted. So let's talk some more about some guidance for program managers and supervisors that we've included in the toolkit. Next slide, please, Carla. Thanks. So this toolkit can be a step-by-step resource for contemplating organizational changes, maybe some shifts in the mindset of the organization and the staff, or the approaches that you all have been using. It offers resources for assessing where staff and the program are right now, and also reflecting on what it might take to build, enhance, and sustain a more family-centered integrated approach. There are links to resources within the toolkit to delve more deeply for additional guidance and information and really practical tools. There are references within the toolkit. I think I mentioned this earlier, to the Center's Tools for Transformation, Becoming Accessible, Culturally Responsive, Trauma-Informed Organizations, what the center calls the ACRTI. And there's a link to the full document and specific sections as they relate back to this toolkit. We offer program guidance and specific topics based on what we've really learned was most relevant and useful to gaining knowledge, resources, and confidence in providing more family-centered services. Section 13 includes questions that we developed for direct service staff, supervisors, and caregivers too, during the listening session process in the implementation phase. So now we want to spend some time thinking about how to use the toolkit for facilitating team-based discussions and also in individual supervisory meetings. So next slide, please, Carla. Terrific, thanks. So in the toolkit, we offer suggestions for supervisors to engage in critical conversations and guide topics for further exploration, action, and reflection. So these conversation prompts might encourage deeper discussions, and these can take place during staff meetings or supervision time. So this pulls out an example that Susan had shared a little bit earlier. So again, it's just an example of critical conversations from section 2. So the readiness and getting started section. It is helpful, I just want to make note, it's helpful to decide ahead of time who might be the best person within your organization to help facilitate these conversations. Supervisors or program managers might lead a conversation or maybe initiate a series of staff meeting conversations through some of the prompts. Some of the sample prompts that we posted here, thinking about in your organization, how do you currently provide services to survivors and their children? So this prompt can be an opportunity to do a brief self-reflection, right? What's in place now? Or in your organization, is there a willingness to work with survivors and their children as a family unit? Thinking about, like, are the current services more siloed or separated? What are we already doing where the family is a unit? Another question might be, are there job descriptions for the staff that describe family-centered work expectations, right? We also might ask, like, does the organization provide training and employee development that includes developing skills and knowledge specific to the needs of families. Another critical conversation might be, is the physical environment of the program able to accommodate the needs of families? So just thinking about, are there dedicated, inviting spaces that meet the needs and capacities of everyone from babies and toddlers to school-age children and also teenagers, right? And also, our staff discussions focused on deficits and challenges that are going on with the families in our services? Or are we focused on what's going well with survivors and their children? Is there attention being given to the family's strengths? And are we really looking at their resiliency? So I just want to invite you all right now to take a few minutes and reflect on these questions I'm going to ask you as they relate to your own organization or program, right? And feel free to share your thoughts with us on chat. Susan's going to help monitor this a little bit for me. What are you already doing well in working with survivors and their children? What's going well right now? What might be currently missing in the services that you are offering? And what might you want to consider in order to move towards a more integrated, family-centered approach in your organization? We want to hear from you. Feel free to put it in chat.
Yeah, you all have been really responsive, so we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on some of these questions, which you may have been asking yourselves. As we're waiting to hear from you. I know one program in the Chicago area that I've worked with, and that was actually one of our implementation sites, said that they ended up working with some community providers, funders, to get materials donated to do an outside playground that they could use that was enclosed and safe. And they said it made a huge, huge difference to the families that they were serving in a shelter-based program. So that's one example of thinking about the physical environment. And of course, we have that whole section on creating welcoming, creating a welcoming environment, where we kind of walk you through a number of things around, from a child's eye view and eye level, how welcoming is the space? What's it like? Are there kind of cozy spaces? I'm just kind of picking on that one, but are there cozy spaces to cuddle, to read, to just be together? And are there opportunities inside and out for kids to get their energy out? Okay, we've got something here in the chat. Let me look at this. Great. Oh, you all are filling in now. Okay. You have one activity that we feel works well is our family resource board, and it's very interactive and provides families a lot of activities that promote health. Oh, that's awesome. So in other words, it sounds like you have something that staff and families can get some ideas from and do together. And then Katrina was saying providing services for survivors and their children as a group. Yes, absolutely. We don't have that in this toolkit, but I think you can expand or adapt that, or you may already be doing some of that. Yeah. Okay, I'm curious. This is interesting. We recently ordered an inflatable television. I'm fascinated by that. Huh. That's really interesting as a way to view things together, but also provide social distancing. That sounds very creative. Wow. Deanna's saying we raised money to build a play space and playground with a covered table. Yes, awesome. And very similar to that one of the examples that I was talking about. And Bianca's talking about really creative, wonderful ideas, a families count workshop. Huh. So they are invited to participate in completing a project together. Supplies are provided. I think that's so awesome. I mean, one of the things that we talk about in the toolkit is having that opportunity to give back. You know, especially when families are not in immediate crisis, but can really contribute in some ways to the community through what they're doing. Yeah, that's awesome. Through Amazon, right? Okay. And Cheryl was talking about statewide program of serving Indigenous crime victims and having developing a network of service providers. That's so important. I really think, you know, it's time consuming to build those relationships, but once you have them, it makes such a difference in terms of what can be provided. Oh, and Emily is talking about 4 large gardening beds. That's awesome during the pandemic. Yolanda's saying they redid the shelter living room. So you all really have these wonderful creative ideas. It's very exciting to hear, and I hope that the toolkit will enrich some of that. Let's see. Awesome. Need more ideas around teens in our space. And so, you know, Yolanda, I would recommend holding some kind of listening session with teens to find out what's on their list, right? Of what they would like, some privacy, some separation from younger kids. We know that often older siblings in a family, in a positive way, take care of the younger ones, but it's also helpful to have some boundaries and space that feels more you know, just for teens, etc. That's great. So this was a lot on the family activities. I'm wondering if anybody has comments on some of the other critical conversation starters that we had in terms of how you recruit for these positions to know, you know, and what are you doing around family-centered work expectations? Is there willingness to work with survivors and their children together? What are you coming up with around that? Very impressed with how you all are creatively approaching activities for families, and I think that's wonderful. I think, you know, so do you all, I mean, I'm curious to know, I think Jeannette may be as well. Do you have job descriptions currently that describe family-centered work expectations and working together with families? And if you don't, that's fine. I mean, I think this is just to help you start to think about where could you go from where you're at if you have an interest in moving towards a more integrated approach to services. Give it a minute. I know it, especially since we can't see each other, it feels like a little bit of, you know, silence and with nothing happening here, but okay. So Katrina's saying no, that do not have job descriptions, but would love some helpful tips. Yeah. And I don't think we don't have a template, but I think as you go through the toolkit, you'll look at and get some ideas of what you might be recruiting for. Certainly a willingness, you know, to expand and sometimes people, you know, and we have some exercises and team-based activities around this very issue, because certainly over the years, we have been impressed with the level of sophistication and services that advocates provide. But we have heard over and over again, advocates may say, I wasn't hired to work with kids, and I want to work specifically with adult survivors. And so we say that's fine, but this is just helping you to then expand a little more and also give those, you know, to find out what are the barriers. You know, I also have talked to many advocates who have said, you know, I experienced domestic violence when I was growing up, and it's really difficult for me to see the impact that it's having on the children. And so there, you know, there are ways to begin to look at and work with this without forcing anybody into doing something that they're uncomfortable with, of course. Well, I want to just see what your comments are, because I've been doing a lot of talking here. So room for growth. Anti-oppressive practices that impact the family as well. Deanna, I totally agree with that. That's really important. And I think our broader center toolkit and materials on looking at that will be very helpful. You know, Jeannette has mentioned the ACRTI approach, accessible, culturally responsive, trauma-informed approach to services. And this toolkit is really like a companion, only it's a companion document. It does some other things, but that's a really important, you know, some of our other materials are really important. Let's see. So outside, okay, so outside of, Emily is saying that outside of shelter residents, you're not thinking too much about a family focus. So I'm really excited to hear that you're going to think about reevaluating this, and maybe hearing on this webinar or the next ones to come what others are doing around that. And we hope to hear from the panel that maybe that's something they can speak to as well, that we're part of our implementation sites. Yeah, sure. All victim service. Meeting the needs of the family, right? Anything else before we move on? I think the last dot point, and Jeannette talked about this, is that sometimes we're faced with such complex situations and needs that families present to us. And we ourselves as providers can start losing hope at times and feel a sense of despair. And I think when that starts to come up and we don't have the resources and knowledge and that we need, that it can be very easy then to get into an us versus them type mode, where instead of looking for strengths and resilience and what it took to even, you know, come to see you, to be, you know, to get services took for that particular survivor and family, we can go down a negative route. So hoping that, you know, I think that last dot point just sort of says, are we aware of what's going on in the way we're talking, and then how that impacts what kinds of services we can deliver. Jeannette, I don't know if there's anything more that you wanted to add to this.
No, I really appreciate what folks are sharing. And I love some of the stuff that you all are doing, the family activity kits, and some of the conversations around job descriptions. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Great. Should we move on to the next then?
Yeah. Next slide, Carla, please. Thank you. So each section of the toolkit also offers some practical suggestions for what a supervisor can do. So this is a sample of that with a really sweet picture of a little one running through water. So it's parallel to what a direct staff person can do. So program managers or supervisors within organizations can do a couple things that are listed here, right? They can support staff in developing their skills for working with families by offering maybe in-house trainings or maybe sharing webinar information, sharing this toolkit, or encouraging and also paying for conferences that staff can learn and hone some skills. Program managers can also consider how current organizational rules, or maybe they're called guidelines in your programs, might be restricting parenting practices, right? So program managers and supervisors can invite conversations about this with direct service staff. Like, let's look at some of these guidelines. Let's look at some of these rules. Program managers can also consider the use of space. So whether it's a shelter, whether it's a non-residential program, right? Just thinking about space. Susan mentioned like thinking about inside and outside space and how family friendly are those spaces, and thinking about, sometimes we do a really good job. I'm thinking about a program I worked in. We did a really good job with making sure that we had things for toddlers and school-aged children. But we struggled for a while in terms of thinking about our space and what might be best for teens, until we really thought about like having some private space for teens, maybe that they have access to computer for homework or to connect with friends online and things like that. So those are, again, each section of the toolkit offers some of these suggestions around what a supervisor can be doing, and how, you know, you all can really make a difference. And really going back to that piece around families and how our perspective is acknowledging that negative or deficit focused perspective, right, that staff might be expressing at times, and also introducing a focus on strengths and talking and really reflecting about what survivors and their children are bringing, and to point out the resiliency that we see, to like model that and encourage that in the staff. I'm looking from Deanna in the chat. One area that would be really helpful is model policies for programs that aren't mandated reporters and other policies that impact families. Yes, absolutely. What's been really important in terms of the implementation sites and working with them is to have these programs in New Mexico sharing some of their policies, and connecting with programs in Chicago and vice versa. And Chicago programs sharing what they're doing and their experiences has been really valuable. And we're hoping through this toolkit that it's a way to connect folks with some best practices. So thank you, Deanna, for offering that. Susan, any other thoughts from you?
I don't think so at this point. I mean, I'm hoping that this is getting people's wheels spinning a little bit, and maybe you have some. We're gonna, I think, go into a Q&A reflection time. So maybe this is a nice segue. I also have been really appreciative of what folks have put in the chat and your ideas and what you're thinking about so far. So that's been awesome. So I think maybe, Carla, we're ready to go on to the next slide. And this is our time. Now, maybe it might be helpful if you have some specific questions, as we've given you this overview today, that you'd like us to consider. Because again, we're putting together this three-part series. And so if something specific comes up today that we don't have time to respond to, then we will hopefully include that as we go. So just maybe some brief reflections on what your thoughts are in terms of what you've heard today about the toolkit. I know it's not the same as having it in your hands, but what's come up for you as we've kind of reviewed this? And please put your thoughts or questions in the chat box. I should say, what else has come up for you? Or what are you taking from this at this point? Some of you have commented that the staff development pieces and all sound really helpful, important. There's been some thought about revisiting job descriptions, certainly looking at family-friendly policies. Anything else that comes to mind, or any thoughts or reflections? Let's see. Okay, so Deanna was asking again to have access to examples of policies. That's a good question, Deanna. I think when we have our panel, if they want to share, and we could arrange for them to share their emails, you might want to reach out to them, because I really think program to program is so important. So we'll look at that. That's a good idea. We will provide those PowerPoint slide sets right after. I'm sorry, we generally do not provide them before. Let's see. Oh, good. Emily's saying that they're excited about seeing the entire toolkit and thinking about it for the onboarding process. Great. Oh, wow. Excellent. You've got new leadership. Oh, thank you, Patricia. Yeah, we've heard so much from other folks about how they really wanted kind of what we're calling pack and go activities. So I think that section will be really helpful. At least we hope it will be really helpful to people. Any other thoughts or reflections? I think, let's see, I think we're gonna move on to the preview for next time, but feel free if you have other thoughts or reflections to put them in the chat and we'll come back to them. So Carla, if you could move us to the next slide. All right, so this is a preview of what, and I kind of mentioned this at the very beginning, but we are gonna hone in more on those best practices and program guidance on responding to the needs of children, teens, and families. And we'll be looking specifically at some of those sections, 5, 6, and 7, I think they are, 7 and 8. And then we'll talk about a specific vignette. We're going to use that, and we'll talk about how it might be helpful to be used within your program, or how you might want to adapt it. And we'll be curious to see what your thoughts are on that. And then the other reminder is that part 3 in the series will be coming up in 2 weeks. If you haven't had a chance to sign up for parts 2 and 3, please do so. Spread the word. I know we've had some glitches in terms of our website recently, and it may have been harder for people to find this. So let us know if you're having issues. You know, we hope that those of you that were on the webinar today will be able to join us for the second and third. And then we can go, I think, to our last slide, Carla. So this will be available in about 10 minutes. This is the teaser. It's not live yet. It won't be activated yet, but you will be able to download this at the end of the webinar. And so you'll have this in front of you when we go into parts 2 and 3, and you may have some more specific questions and thoughts and ideas for us. And in the meantime, if you want to contact either myself or Jeannette, you have our email addresses there. So Carla, maybe this is a good time to take folks into, or to give them in the chat the link to the online survey to give us feedback about today. And Lori, thank you for your comment. I'm so pleased to hear that you feel like we're touching on so many of the questions and issues that you're here from advocates. And we appreciate that. Yeah. So everybody hopefully can see, Carla has put in the survey, and we'll be wanting to get your feedback and input. And I think that we'll stay on. Jeannette and Carla and I will stay on for a few more minutes if there are any other thoughts or reflections that people have. And then we hope to see you next week, next Wednesday. Jeannette, I don't know if there's anything more you would like to add or say.
Thank you all for participating this afternoon. Really appreciate your input. So thank you all, and
Thank
look
you so
forward to
much.
hearing your feedback.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeannette and Susan, for today's webinar. Thank you to everyone for joining today. I know it's a Wednesday and it's a busy day. So just to let everyone know, and as has been mentioned, within the next week, we will send you a follow-up email with the link to the recording, the slides, any handouts referenced, and a certificate, as well as the link to this evaluation again, just to let us know how we're doing and what could be improved on. And again, thank you so much, and we hope you'll have a wonderful afternoon.
All right. And as I said, we are hoping, fingers crossed, because we've been just checking accessibility pieces with our toolkit, so that you can really do the things we promised, like you can click within it to get to the different sections and to get to the handouts at the end. So yeah, we're going to be looking forward to hearing your feedback. And we should be going live with that, as far as I know, in about well, Central Time at a little after 3 o'clock. So in about 7-8 minutes. How's that for a for a teaser? So I think with that, thank you all for your comments and thanks. And we'll give it another minute, and then I think, Carla, we will probably be ready to end. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I'll end the session in a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I want to echo what Jeannette said. Just very impressive to hear your ideas and thoughts, and really appreciated everyone's input today in the chat. Wish we could see you all.